Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I will flip in here. And he's basically saying, Jason, what sort of factors are involved in retaining muscle mass when you're losing body fat? You had said at one time that it's probably safe to lose 1 to 2 pounds of fat a week. How does protein intake and other things factor in? So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, that 1 to 2 pounds is even a conditional statement. People need to understand you're taking even a statement like that out of context, because there are situations to where if you're losing 2 pounds a week, I can assure you you're losing muscle mass. So that is a conditional statement. So what we need to understand is the bigger picture here, because most of you work out. The majority of you, I assume, lift weights. If you're losing body fat, the last thing you want to do is lose muscle mass, and people need to understand that. Even for people who aren't even concerned with getting big and muscular, every pound of muscle that you lose is a pound less fat that you lost while eating the same amount of food. So you're creating a calorie deficit to lose weight. Ideally, you want as much of the weight that you lose to be actual fat, because that will keep your metabolism higher. It'll let you eat more. It'll make regaining fat slower because your metabolism will be higher from having more muscle, and it'll cause you to lose more fat. You want all the weight that you lose to be fat, or if not all of it, at least the vast majority. There's going to be some water weight involved. You're dieting to lose fat. Common sense. Not to lose muscle. So, what are the factors here? Well, there's several things involved that people need to understand. One factor, as far as actual muscle retention, is how long you've been lifting weights. This is one of the biggest ones, and this is why noobs, it's really, really easy for people who first start working out to lose fat. And that's something people need to understand. It really is. Like, people who act like fat loss is difficult, they're probably not lifting weights. That's right up high on the list. Anyone who thinks losing fat is difficult is not resistance training. Because people who first start lifting usually gain muscle no matter what they do. Even if they're losing weight, if they're obese and they start lifting weights, they gain muscle even if they're under eating. So if they're gaining muscle, and that is expending calories. That is speeding up their metabolism and speeding up their fat loss. And literally, noobs the first few months in the gym, as long as they're training correctly on a good program, will gain muscle, even if they're probably not eating enough protein, even if their protein isn't ideal, even if they're not eating that many calories, even if they're losing weight because they're not eating enough calories or burning more calories than they expend, they still gain muscle. All that muscle they gain burns even more calories to create it, because they're having to pull protein from their diet to build it a little bit, but then there's energy involved in this process. Building muscle requires calories. Maintaining muscle requires calories. So they're burning through extra calories and losing fat even faster if they're lifting weights. As opposed to people who come in and just start losing weight without lifting weights, they lose muscle, which means they lose less fat, which means they lose less weight. So the amount of time you've been resistance training is a factor. The longer you've been lifting, the easier it is to lose muscle mass when you are losing weight and dieting. Big factor, to the point to where the extreme of obviously the noob is going to gain muscle. But the longer you've been lifting, the more difficult it becomes, which means the other factors become more important, because the more muscle mass you have, the harder it is to retain it. So those other factors are going to be, number one, protein intake is a big factor. All right, protein intake is a factor, but it's a sliding scale, meaning the amount of protein that you need to retain muscle isn't a fixed number. I generally recommend to people, like most experts out there do, who are dietitians or sports dietitians who work with athletes, that athletes, and we'll consider anyone lifting weights and doing cardio to be an athlete for this purpose, needs about 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight to maintain muscle when cutting. Now, Eric Helms has data suggesting it's higher, but that's not for the average person. That's not even for the average person lifting weights. He found numbers even higher than that to be necessary for pre-contest natural bodybuilders. Someone whose goal is just to lose fat and be healthier and more athletic and feel better is not going to cut as lean as those guys did, because that's part of your sliding scale here. There's several factors involved in how much protein you need. Number one, how large your calorie deficit is. The faster you're losing weight through the larger calorie deficit, the more protein you have to have in your diet to hold on to muscle. Big factor. Next factor, as far as the protein is concerned, is how much body fat do you have? The leaner you are, the more protein you need. So you can see how when we look at it from that perspective, someone who is really lean, they're under 10% body fat, is going to need a lot more protein to hold on to their muscle tissue than someone who's 15% or 20% body fat. It's a sliding scale. The fatter you are, the less protein you need in your diet to hold on to your muscle tissue. Hence why ultra high protein diets are not really that great for obese people trying to lose weight. They can be, but it's not preserving more muscle tissue because it's not that hard for them to preserve their muscle tissue. They don't need as much protein, whereas the guy under 10% body fat is going to need more and more protein the leaner he gets to hold on to muscle. And it will reach a point to where he will lose muscle no matter what. Meaning there is absolutely no way you're going from 10% body fat down to 6 or 7% body fat without losing muscle. I don't care how much protein you eat. I don't care how perfect your training is. You are going to lose muscle in that range. You don't get to 6 or 7% body fat without losing a couple pounds of muscle. It's not going to happen. People need to get over that idea. You can minimize the loss. You can hopefully only lose 2 pounds of muscle if you consume an enormous amount of protein, if your training is perfect, if you have everything dialed in perfect. You're not going to lose a lot of muscle, but you will lose some, but in particularly people who are drug-free. So that's a big factor there also. So we can put that into the whole equation. How lean you are will be a factor in muscle loss. Someone who is 8% body fat and losing fat is going to lose muscle. They're going to lose some. And it's going to be very, very difficult for them not to the point of impossibility. Whereas in someone who's 25% body fat can lose fat, and he can lose fat faster while still holding on to all of their muscle tissue. All right, someone who's 25% body fat will generally be able to lose up to 2 pounds per week as long as they're getting sufficient protein in that range I described, the 1.5 to 2 kilograms per pound of body weight. They can, in theory, lose up to 2 pounds of fat per week while holding on to all of their muscle tissue. You do take someone who's 10% body fat, even a pound a week of fat loss is going to cost him a little bit of muscle. He's going to have to cut down into the ounces range. So there's a lot of factors there, a lot of factors involved. There's training experience time. There's how much protein you consume. There's how lean you are, how fast you're losing weight, and how fast you're losing weight is a product of your calorie deficit. And a lot of people will argue about that of, is it better to just eat less, or is it better to eat more and use more energy, train more? That's subject to debate. I don't think it's ever been conclusively proven either way. People very successfully get fairly lean using both methods. I personally would tell people to probably burn more calories, do more activity, mainly because you're going to be able to eat more food. And if you're able to eat more food, you can sustain a diet longer because diet adherence is a big deal. And I think that's the big factor in that one. That's about diet adherence. It's not about it being physically better. It's about it psychologically being better. Losing weight while eating more food usually makes your diet easier to maintain for longer periods of time. So that's an enormous factor as well. The ability to even maintain your diet. But the other downside, and this is the problem we run into also, again, another factor, training relatively hard, training enough to try to stimulate muscle growth, and how hard you train is a factor in retaining muscle mass, because you do need to create a need for your body to hold on to its muscle tissue. Your body doesn't want to hold on to muscle tissue when you're losing weight, because we're however you want to word it, evolved to survive famines, ice ages, things like that. The best way to survive a famine is to slow your metabolism down a little bit. How do you slow metabolism? Get rid of some of that metabolically expensive muscle. Muscle requires calories to maintain. So your body naturally wants to shed a little bit of muscle when you're losing weight. And you need to understand that. It's a survival mechanism. Muscle is very useful in many survival situations. It's not that useful when you're starving. And your body will perceive prolonged calorie deficit as starvation. It will perceive it that way. So you have to give your body a reason to maintain it. So you need to be training with enough weight, with enough workload, with enough tension, with enough fatigue to tell your body, hey, I need to hold on to this muscle. It's important. However, the problem is that one of the popular methods is to do very large volumes of training to lose fat. Now, that can actually work because it is telling your body to hold on to the muscle tissue and it's burning calories at the same time. It's a great combination. The problem is that when drugs are not thrown into the equation, anabolic drugs, the big problem is that you can also exceed your maximum recoverable fatigue. It's easier to recover from higher training volumes when you're eating more food, right? Food is anabolic. Food is muscle preserving. Food helps with recovery. It's like the expression, you have to eat big to get big. There's a reason for that. Food is anabolic. When you're on less food, recovery is more difficult. It's physically harder for your body to repair traumatized muscle tissue that's been disrupted from training. And the more you train, the more that disruption exists, the more micro tears happen, the more protein degradation and things that happen in your muscle tissue. Well, excessive training volume can push you to the point to where you can't recover anymore. And when you can't recover because you've done too much volume, again, particularly true for people who are completely drug-free, natural guys, you can reach a threshold to where you're not going to recover from the volume. What's going to happen? Your body will start losing muscle tissue again. So it's a fine strategy, but it's a strategy for people who understand their body better. So I'm not knocking it as a strategy. Many people are very, very successful at using high volume weightlifting to help with their weight loss. We all know people on YouTube who are successful doing it. So I'm not going to knock the method. However, it requires more finesse. It requires a better understanding of your body, and it requires a better understanding of what you personally can recover from, of knowing your personal limits without your ego getting involved. It requires an honest assessment of your personal limitations. Not everybody can do that. And that is a skill that many people have to acquire over time. It takes experience to get yourself there, knowing your body's limits, knowing your personal limits and what you can handle and recover from. Because when you exceed them and you're cutting and losing weight, you will start losing muscle tissue as a result of it. But up to a certain point, it's actually fantastic. As long as you don't cross that threshold, it's actually a very effective method. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.